Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown. If you eat, sleep, and breathe Maryland basketball, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm thrilled to be back for another episode to talk some Terps. But first, a reminder, you can find me all across the internet on the various social media platforms, all at the same handle, at Gorg on Sports. And hey, if you're listening to the podcast, but you want to be watching it, you want to see some video, then I have great news for you. You can find us on YouTube. This show is now part of the Department of Hoops, a DMV media network. It does a great job of covering all things local hoops. So make sure you check us out there, youtube.com/@ Department of Hoops, for this show, for Wizards coverage, for Georgetown, GW coverage. Again, all things local hoops there, and I'm thrilled to be a part of that network. But I know why you're here. I know why you're tuning in today. It's because you can't get enough of hearing about, of talking about that expectation changing, momentum grabbing, national excitement generating, tail whipping of a game we saw at the Xfinity Center last night, where Maryland takes down Ohio State 83-59 in its Big Ten opener. This game was done and dusted over OVA at halftime. 50-17 was the halftime score. Maryland held a 33-point lead at the half, and according to Jeff Erman, he tweeted this out. He does a great job covering all things Terps over at Inside MD Sports. He's the publisher over there. It was the largest halftime lead in a Big Ten game since 1996-1997. That's approaching 30 years of Big Ten basketball. That's how badly Maryland beat the brakes off Ohio State last night, especially in that first half. So what a night it was if you're a Terps fan. And on a night where there's just a laundry list of things that you can say Maryland did well, one thing stood out to me above all else, and it was the defensive effort. It was the way Maryland shut down a really good Ohio State offense in the first half. An Ohio State offense that came into the game second nationally in three-point shooting percentage. An Ohio State offense that featured a bunch of different guys who can score, whether it's Bruce Thornton, whether it's Michi Johnson, Micah Parrish, John Mobley. They have a bunch of guys on that team who can score and who can shoot the basketball. And you have to give Maryland a ton of credit for the way they shut them down, particularly in the first half. In the first half of that basketball game, Ohio State did not make a single three. 0 of 7 from beyond the arc. I thought Maryland did a really nice job of limiting their three-point attempts. And when they did get attempts, they didn't get a lot of open ones. They were tough looks. Maryland, of course, did a great job generating turnovers in that first half. Forced Ohio State into 12 turnovers. And I watched the TV copy back to that. I was there in person last night, so I saw it live. But I like to watch the TV copy back as well. And Robbie Hummel, who's the color commentator on that game, he does a great job. A huge fan of his work. He was talking about how Maryland was defending the ball screens with Derek Queen and Julian Reese, and how they weren't quite hedging, they weren't quite blitzing, but they were doing kind of something in between. And there was one play that stood out to me where Derek Queen is defending the ball screen, he forces a turnover, and then he does Derek Queen things from there where he's able to grab the ball, take it up the court, and just kind of showcase the full package that he is. But Maryland did a great job. It was a team effort. You want to call out Rodney Rice, and you want to call out Jacoby Gillespie for holding Bruce Thornton, Ohio State's leading scorer and point guard, to 0 points until around the 4-minute mark of the first half. That's unbelievably impressive, but it was truly a team effort. And you think about those guards, you think about Reese and Queen, you think about Tafara Gapare, who had a big block in the first half of this game, and certainly going to talk more about him here in just a minute. But for a team that I thought had a lot of potential defensively coming into the season, and had certainly looked very good against overmatched competition, but had a little bit been lit up against a guy like Cam Jones for Marquette, a guy like Eric Dixon for Villanova. It was really impressive because I had some questions. My questions, and if you listen to the preview show, you heard me ask. I said, hey, Maryland has been really good against the Canisiuses of the world, the Florida A&Ms of the world. They've shut those teams down. The numbers look great, but when they've gone up against Marquette, when they've gone up against a Villanova, numbers aren't quite so good. Cam Jones went off. Eric Dixon went off. Is this a team still trying to figure out how to defend really high-level competition? And I think any question that you may have had about the Maryland defense, or at least the ceiling of the Maryland defense, how good this defense can be, I think it was answered in large part last night because that defense looked unbelievable. And it seemed like there was a certain level of intensity about that defense that I don't know if I want to say it was missing, but it was different. It was certainly different than what I've seen in any other game this year, or certainly the Marquette and Villanova games this year. The way they were able to attack, the way they were able to force turnovers, it was extraordinarily impressive. And the way they were able to hold Ohio State down in the first half, that was the number one thing that stood out to me. This is a team based around defense. The defense is going to drive this team. Defense leads to offense. Those turnovers lead to easy buckets. And that's, I think, the key for this Maryland team. And when you think about realizing their ceiling, it's all about the defense. So if there was a question about what that ceiling was, I think in large part it was really answered last night by that defensive performance in the first half. Again, holding Ohio State, who came into the game as the number 2 team in the country as far as 3-point shooting percentage, to 0 of 7 from 3 in the first half of that game. They made a couple in the second half, but ultimately finished the game. I think they finished, here it is, 4 of 12. Still very, very impressive for the Terps. And then holding Bruce Thornton, their leading scorer, to no points until right around the 4-minute mark of the first half. Another extraordinarily impressive feat by the Terps. The second thing that stood out to me in this game was the play of Tafara Gapare. He's a guy, the Georgia Tech transfer, who I really didn't know what to expect coming into this year. So he hadn't played a ton at Georgia Tech last year. Early in this season, he really wasn't playing a ton for the Terps. And Kevin Willard talked about it post-game, and he said, he's learning defensively. He had gotten lost at times defensively, and that's why he hadn't played as much. Well, he's really broken out, certainly on the offensive end, over the past couple of games. 19 points against Bucknell, 9 against Alcorn State, 12 last night against Ohio State, including a 3. And that was another thing that I thought was a good insight by Robbie Hummel talking about on the broadcast, the importance of Tafara Gapare and his ability to hit that outside shot, to create spacing on the court when you're playing with a guy like Julian Reese, like a Derek Queen. And he showed some things last night. I mean, he hit the 3, but he also had the pump fake 3 where he drove baseline and had a rim-rattling dunk that set the crowd into a frenzy. He also had a big block that was initially called a goaltend, but then overturned because it was a clean block. He's a guy who I think, especially with Jordan Geronimo out, I think he's a guy that is critical for Maryland with his length, with his athleticism. And then on the offensive end, he seems like he's starting to figure it out there too, with his ability to shoot the 3 ball a little bit, to take it to the basket. He grabbed a few offensive rebounds last night, or at least one that I remember very clearly. That was very impressive, and Maryland did a great job with that offensive rebounding last night. Another effort type of thing. When I think about defense, it's effort. When I think about offensive rebounding, it's effort. And Maryland did both of those things very well last night. So Tafara Gapare is a guy who I didn't have high expectations for coming into this season. But now when I envision what Maryland can be, he plays a role. And there's just more and more guys over these first, 9 games in the season as Maryland sits at 8-1, that you think about, hey, they can be a contributor. They can play a role. And that's one of the things that gets me so excited about what we've seen from this Maryland team so far. And then the last thing I want to call out about this Ohio State game is just the play of Jacoby Gillespie, because I thought that Jacoby Gillespie really set the tone last night, both on the offensive and defensive end. I don't know if I've seen a game that complete from Jacoby Gillespie yet this season, and I'm starting to think Jacoby Gillespie, who put up 23 points last night, 4 assists, I'm starting to think he's a guy who could challenge to be one of the best guards in this conference, one of the best guards in the Big Ten. Because it seems like every time you need him, he rises to the occasion. Against Marquette, he puts up 24 points. Last night against Ohio State, he puts up 23 points. He seems like a guy who can rise to the occasion in a big game. You clearly cannot give this guy any space. He's shooting almost 40% from beyond the arc now. You give him just a little bit of space, and he's going to drill one in your eye. He can take it to the basket. I like the way he's running this team, and I thought that defensive effort last night was so impressive, especially locking down Bruce Thornton. And again, you got to give Rodney Rice a lot of credit there, because he was definitely involved in that. He was on him at times, but Gillespie was a lot as well. And Jacoby Gillespie seems like a guy, the Belmont transfer, again, a guy who we had high expectations for, certainly higher than we did for Gapare. He was a little bit more of a known quantity. He had performed very well at a lower level, but you never know how that's going to translate up. And it seems like Kevin Willard has struck gold again with another mid-major guard transferring up, because I just can't say enough about Jacoby Gillespie. I thought he was the tone setter last night, both offensively and defensively, with the way he locked down Thornton and the way he hit some big shots early in that game. He feels like a guy that gives this team confidence. And so when you put this all together, when you look at this game, when you look at this start to this season, this 8-1 start to this season, I start to think, I mentioned at the beginning, I said that was an expectation-changing win. And I believe that. My expectations are now changed for this team 9 games into the season. So I started thinking, I was driving home last night. I'm like, this is one of the most exciting. I am so excited to be a Maryland fan right now. I'm so excited to be a Maryland grad right now. I'm so excited every time I get to watch this basketball team. When is the last time I've been this excited about Maryland basketball? Because I love to put things in historical context. I love to think about, how they relate to Maryland teams of the past. And there were some moments a couple years ago, Kevin Willard's first year, where there were some fun games, the upset of Purdue at home. There were some, early season tournament where they beat Miami and they blew out St. Louis up at the Mohegan Sun. A fun Friday night game against Illinois. But that team, that 2023 team, although fun, and Jameer Young was a revelation, and it was fun to kind of be in this new era of Maryland basketball, it seemed like it had some obvious flaws. You never really looked at that team and were like, oh, that team could make a run in March. You hoped, but you're pretty sure, like, look, this is fun. It's a great year one. It's exciting. We're going to enjoy these moments, but it didn't seem like a team that was really going to make a run in March. I think for me, I have to go back to February of 2020. And 2020 is a really interesting season, I think, as everybody remembers, because, of course, the NCAA tournament got canceled in 2020. But in February of 2020, February 15th to be exact, Maryland won a game against Michigan State in East Lansing. And Anthony Cowan had a great game in that one. And I remember watching that game, and Maryland was on a pretty long win streak at the time. I think that was their 7th in a row. And I remember watching that game, Maryland getting it done in East Lansing. It was a team that had Anthony Cowan and Jalen Smith, Aaron Wiggins. It felt like a team who had just come off a disappointing NCAA tournament loss the year before to LSU in the second round. It felt like a team that really did have potential. That win put Maryland at 21-4, 11-3 in the Big Ten. And at that moment, I could not have been more excited to be a Maryland basketball fan. That's the last time I had been this excited, I think, was after that Michigan State game. Now, things did not go well from there, and I don't think I need to remind anybody that the Terps would win their next game, move to 12-3 in the conference, 22-4 overall, but they would lose 3 of their last 5, and they would ultimately rebound with a regular season ending win against Michigan that gave them a 3-way tie for first place in the Big Ten. But things were not trending the right direction. Now, we'll never know how they would have done in the NCAA tournament. That will be a debate for all time. Personally, I think that team was trending the wrong direction, unfortunately. I didn't like how they were playing down the stretch. They had a bad history of kind of trending the wrong way the previous few years in that era of Maryland basketball. And my personal thought is, yeah, they probably were not going to do a ton in the tournament. They had a really tough first round Big Ten tournament game upcoming with Penn State, I believe. Then that's a Penn State program that had given Mark Turgeon tons of trouble over the years, including that year when Maryland lost to them in December. So, but the beauty is, there's a lot of people out there who will tell you, hey, Maryland was going to go to a Final Four that year. I guess that's beauty is not the right word, because nothing about that tournament being canceled was beautiful. But that was a year that was very much up for grabs nationally. Dayton fans will tell you forever, like, that was their year to win it. They had Obi Toppin. They were an outstanding basketball team that year. San Diego State was very good that season. It seemed like that could be a year they could compete for a national title with Malachi Flynn. But a lot of Maryland fans will tell you, we think Maryland could compete then. That's a little bit of an aside, just to say, the last time I was this excited about a Maryland basketball team was after they went to East Lansing and beat a good Michigan State team on the road. And that's how excited I am right now, because this Maryland team, after last night, you feel like the sky is the limit. You feel like this team can be elite defensively. You feel like this team has enough elite skill between Derek Queen and Julian Reese and Jacoby Gillespie, Rodney Rice. They have enough pieces. They have enough depth. They have enough guys who can win you a game on any given night, that the ceiling is really, really high for this team. So that's how excited I am about this Maryland team right now. Now, there's a chance that Maryland can even increase that excitement. They can really push it to the limit, because I'm not ready to put a label on it quite yet. I will say this. My expectation before the season is I thought Maryland should compete and make the NCAA tournament. Now, to me, after this 9-game start, seeing what this team can do last night, seeing how they competed with Marquette, seeing how they found a way to win on a neutral site against Villanova, after playing a really bad first half, my expectation, my bare minimum expectation, is to make the tournament. But now I'm really thinking more like, how good of a seed can they get? How well can they compete in this Big Ten that seems pretty wide open with no real clear favorite, except maybe the team that we'll talk about in just a second here? But that's where my head is at now. It's make the tournament. What has changed for me is the minimum expectation now is they should make the tournament, and it's now thinking about how far can they go in the tournament. I'm not ready to put a label on that yet. I'm not ready to say, like, hey, this team needs to go to a Sweet 16, or this team needs to get a 4 seed or better in the tournament. I think that's a little bit premature, but there is no doubt in my mind that this is a tournament team. Anything less than that will be really disappointing to me, and we got to evaluate a little bit further what the expectation is as far as where to finish in the Big Ten, how high they should be seated. But I just see so much potential with this team, between the length, the athleticism, the skill, the fact that it feels like they can win left-handed. And that's something you'll hear me talk about over and over and over again, is, can you win left-handed? When somebody takes away what you do best, can you win in another way? And it feels like, if for some reason a team in the Big Ten, Indiana, for example, which has some really good bigs, can take away Derek Queen and Julian Reese, well, guess what? Jacoby Gillespie and Rodney Rice might be able to win that game for you. So I'm not ready to put a full label on it yet, on how far they can go, on what my expectation is, but I think this was an expectation-changing game as far as making the postseason. We got to still evaluate as far as how far we think they can go in the postseason, or what the expectation is as far as how high they should be seated in the NCAA tournament. But you know what? The expectations can get raised even higher, and maybe I will be ready to put a label on it if they can go to West Lafayette over the weekend and beat the Purdue Boilermakers. Purdue, always a contender in the Big Ten. Last year, they were the national runner-up, getting to that national championship game. But things do look a little bit different for the Boilermakers, because Zach Edey is no longer in the middle for them. The back-to-back National Player of the Year is gone. But what hasn't changed for Purdue is they still have Matt Painter prowling those sidelines, stalking the sidelines. Boilermakers are 7-1 on the season. They do go to Penn State tonight for their Big Ten opener, so it'll be interesting to watch them there. But they have a big win already this year. They've beaten Alabama at home. They've lost to Marquette on the road. That is their lone loss. But they've also picked up neutral site wins over NC State and Ole Miss. So it's a pretty battle-tested Purdue team early here. And although they don't have Zach Edey anymore, a lot is still the same in the fact that their backcourt is the backcourt we've seen over these past several years. Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, those are two guys that came in together as freshmen, and they are still there. They are staples in that backcourt. Braden Smith developed last year into one of the best point guards in the country. He is just an excellent point guard. He is leading the country at this moment in assist rate. And then in the middle, although they don't have Zach Edey, they have a guy by the name of Trey Kaufman-Renn, who has been there at Purdue, but he's kind of taken a back seat the past couple of years. He's kind of been a role player. He has been a role player. Well, not the case this year. Trey Kaufman-Renn is leading this team in scoring, and he really put in work against Grant Nelson and Alabama. It was a clinic in that game as he put up 26 points, 8 boards in that one. And even with that, he was in foul trouble for a lot of that game. It didn't really seem to faze him. He is a guy who is he's different than Zach Edey. He's only 6'9". He's not 7'4", but he can be extraordinarily effective. So this is a very good Purdue team that Maryland is going to go up against this weekend. It's a Purdue team that was picked atop the league by the media ahead of the season. So this is going to be a huge challenge for Maryland. And this is going to be a game that you want to talk about expectation changing, that can truly be expectation changing. Because winning on the road is different than winning at home. No doubt about that. We all know that. If you've been watching Maryland basketball last year, you know that. But what I like about this Maryland team is that defense travels. It's a cliche in basketball, but I think it's true. Defense does travel. And this Maryland team has defense. They answered that question last night. I think they can be an elite defense. So this is a huge game for the Terps coming up here, and one to really just take those expectations sky high. If you look at the KenPom projections right now, had it up just a second ago here, Purdue would be a 4-point favorite in this game. And it's really not a game, to go on the road and win in Mackey is extraordinarily difficult. And that's why I say this would be a truly expectation raising. If Maryland were to win this game, then you start thinking about, can they win the Big Ten? That's truly what you think about. If Maryland can play the game they did last night and then go on the road and beat Purdue in Mackey, a Purdue team that's already beaten Alabama, which is no doubt about it, a national title contender, a team that went to the Final Four last year, then you start thinking, can Maryland win the Big Ten? So this is going to be Maryland's biggest challenge to date, no doubt about it. I hope you enjoy the game this weekend, everybody, and I can't wait to be back next week and to react to what we see in Mackey. Until next time, this has been the Route 1 Rundown.